Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate in the webinar today. I'm very pleased to be invited. I'm also very pleased that this is hopefully the beginning of new cooperation. As it was mentioned, I'm representing the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and I'm land tenure officer at the FAO regional office for Europe and Central Asia, based in Budapest in Hungary, so not so far away. Yes. Now, it was mentioned already several times about the COVID-19 and how it has complicated our lives and the work that we are doing, and also that we are switching now to digital virtual meetings instead of the physical meetings. This is of course how it is and what we are dealing with it, and it's in many ways still in the transition period where we are finding our ways into this. And before I start the presentation that I had prepared, I would mention also that the issues of land market and land market development are also important when we talk about the COVID-19 response. How do we respond to this new situation? And for example, we have seen borders being closed. We have seen how lockdowns. We have seen how difficult it is for trade in some countries to get the inputs that the farmers need. And we see a strong focus now on the importance of strengthening the local food production. So that food is in general more, I think this was a trend that was already ongoing before the COVID, that also the consumers in many countries are very much focusing on buying local produced food. But again, to be able to do so, we need to have land markets. We need to have the development of farms and agricultural holdings in place, and to facilitate these processes before we can talk of the broader agricultural and world development. So my presentation will focus on the 18 program countries that FAO has in Europe and Central Asia. We have in total 53 member countries, including the EU countries, but we are having the program countries where we are providing technical assistance and implementing development projects in 18 countries, beginning from Serbia and ending in Kyrgyzstan and Central Asia. And most of these countries have farm structures that are dominated by smallholders and family farms, and we also see that land fragmentation is excessive. This is the case, for example, in ex-Yugoslavia countries like Serbia, Albania. It's in the Caucasus countries, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan as well. Some of the countries also have dualistic farm structures with many small farms and very few large corporate farms. This is, for example, the case in Moldova, also in the northern part of Serbia. And again, we have relatively few of the countries like Belarus, Russian Federation, Kazakhstan, where the large corporate farms are dominating the farm structures. And in most of the countries, the current farm structures are the result of the land reforms that were implemented from 1990 and onwards. This is not the case in Yugoslavia countries, where the land reforms had little impact on the farm structures, but where the farms largely remain small and fragmented because of the land market being frozen during the whole collectivization era in Yugoslavia after 1945. So this is just to see what is it that we are dealing with. And this is an example from a pilot project on land consolidation that we did a few years ago in Tabuf municipality in Albania. And we can see this illustrates very well. It's an orthophoto of a small part of the project area with an overlay of the cadastral map. And we can see how small the cadastral parcels are, the agricultural land parcels. But we can also see that the colors underneath have different colors, indicating that each owner is more or less using his or her own parcels. In this area, 95% of the land was used by the owners. So we have the excessive fragmentation of both the land ownership and of the land use. Each family had in general, in average, 1.5 hectares and split into 4 or 5 physical parcels. Of course, this is very difficult to have competitive, productive agriculture if you have such farm structures. Here's an overview of land fragmentation in different countries in the region. I have tried to classify them in different categories. I will not go into the detail, but we can see that those countries that distributed during the land reforms, distributed the land parcels in physical parcels to the rural population countries like Albania, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, they all have a very high level of land fragmentation of both the ownership and of the land use. Also, countries in ex-Yugoslavia have the same problems to a large degree. Now, when we talk about development of the agricultural land market, and this is basically what we are supporting and what we are trying to support, we need to have a conceptual understanding of how land markets can develop. And I mean, in this case, the formal land market. We usually make reference to this model. I will not go into the detail, but this model was developed by Williamson and others, 2010, the references on the slide. But it foresees the development of a formal land market in 5 different stages. Starting from the first stage where land exists. We have this, of course, in all countries, you have agricultural land. This is the topic of the land markets that we are talking about. And then the next step, you have land rights. Land rights are formally secured and registered in land registers and cadastre. Then you start in phase 3, the trading of land, but it's still simple. Then the land market gets developed. And finally, in stage 5, the land is seen as a commodity and the market starts really to develop and generate additional wealth. So if we look into these 5 stages of land market development and again look at the same 18 countries, we can classify them into the different categories. I said, except Belarus, all the countries have made it to stage 2, where formal land rights are allocated to private persons. The land rights can be both to the ownership of land, but it can also, as it is the case in several of the countries in Central Asia, to use that land that is owned by the state. But in principle, it does not make any difference also for the trading of land on the market, whether the land is owned or whether you have secure tradable use rights to state land. And most of our countries that we are supporting, they are in the stage 3, where we can see that some land market development is going on, but it's still very weak and only very few have come to a more developed, and none of the countries are at the, let's say, full developed states where land is perceived as a commodity. So a few characteristics about agricultural land markets in Western Balkans, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. I would say that countries are at very different development stages, but land markets are in general still relatively weak. And weak and not functioning land markets are hampering, as I mentioned in the introduction, in general agriculture and rural development. It's very difficult to apply modern technologies. It's very difficult to use pesticides, to use fertilizer in an efficient way if you have parcels that are 0.2 or 0.3 or even smaller hectares per parcel. And the first registration is also of land rights is also very important when we talk about formal markets. Without formal land rights, there is no market. So the first registration is completed in most of the countries. We have a couple of exceptions. In Georgia, for example, where only around 30% of agricultural land is registered, and also Albania has some big gaps or areas where land is not registered. We see that many countries have a high degree of informality in the land market. This comes from unresolved inheritance and also from informal land transactions. So the registered person dies, but the heirs, the family members who are the successors, do not manage to get registered the property in their name. Also, the informal transactions, land is agreed, maybe there are even, let's say, documents between the seller and the buyer, but it's never formally registered. There are, of course, many reasons for this. Complicated and expensive land transaction procedures, for example, widespread corruption, for example, is also some of the issues that are characteristic for this and reasons why people prefer not to register. And we can also say that formal tenure rights are often insecure. So if you want to develop your business, your farming activities, you want to buy more land, and if you don't register, then you have insecure rights, and this is again hampering the whole development of your business. And we also see that all countries have numerous, we could call them technical land registration problems. This includes, for example, discrepancies between the situation on the ground and on the cadastre map, numerous errors in the land registry, for example, misspelled names or wrong names, or people that changed their names and it was never updated or registered. The list is almost endless. And we also see, and this is the linkage with the farm structures, that development of agricultural land markets in itself is hampered by land fragmentation and small average farm sizes. So what can we do about this? FAO has supported the land management instruments and their introduction in the member countries to support development of agricultural land markets. And we have worked with instruments such as land consolidation, land banking, mediation of lease, and also the active management and privatization of state-owned agricultural land. And these instruments can be applied one at a time or combined depending on what is feasible in the specific area. Actually, we always recommend that the first phase of a field project would be to do a feasibility study where you map who are the formal owners, and then you conduct the feasibility study talking with each of the formally registered owners and those who farm the land in the project area, and based on that you decide what would be the land management instruments to be applied in this phase. Of course, there's a lot of legal implications in this as well, because you cannot apply such instruments as land consolidation or land banking without having the solid legal foundation to do so. I would also mention the endorsement in 2012 of the voluntary guidelines and the responsible governance of tenure, VDT. I think this is a very important document, not only for FAO, but it should be for all of us. It's the first international document on tenure rights and governance of tenure. It's a reference to improve the governance of tenure based on international best practice. It's a global document, so in principle it covers the whole world and provides the guidance on specific issues in two parts: the secure tenure right, or the tenure rights and their protection, but also the enjoyment of the tenure right, meaning that you can put your rights on the market, for example. And then we have the discussions on the land market. This, of course, promotes the secure tenure right and responsible governance with respect to all forms of tenure, not only the formal tenure rights, also the protection of legitimate informal tenure rights or legitimate customary rights. These are just as can be just as legitimate as the formal tenure rights. But what is legitimate, of course, depends on the situation in the specific country, and there are often different opinions whether rights are legitimate or not. So we should again work to have formalized all the land rights so that they are also secured. And this section also has, VDT has a section on land consolidation and land banking, which provides more detailed guidance when you want to apply such land management instruments. Land consolidation, I will go a bit through the four instruments one at a time, say a few more words about land consolidation than the other instruments, because FAO has supported land consolidation instruments in 11 countries in Europe and Central Asia in the last decade. And land consolidation is a well-established land management instrument with some global application, but mainly applied in Europe and South Asia. In Europe, the tradition goes back in some countries more than 100 years. And land consolidation can be, as I mentioned, applied both on ownership but also on use rights. And traditionally, land consolidation has been an instrument for agricultural development by facilitating the reduction of land fragmentation, enlarging the holdings and the farm sizes. But we see, beginning from Western Europe, more and more multi-purpose instrument integrated with improved agricultural infrastructure. This could be improved rural roads, irrigation, drainage, whatever, again, the local needs may be. It can also be used as a tool to implement large-scale public projects on infrastructure, nature restoration, environmental protection, climate change, adaptation and mitigation. I think all these, let's say, new problems require new solutions, and land consolidation has this potential to be a multi-purpose instrument. And land consolidation, again, should not be replacing the land market, but it should support the development of the land market. And it also has the side effect, which is important when we talk about formalizing rights, that the outcome of after the land consolidation is clear records that those properties, those rights that participate in the land consolidation process, they are updated, they are formalized if they are informal as part of this process. So we have a clean record after the project, which also allows the land market in that specific area to function better in the future. I would also like to mention a new publication issued by FAO in June this year. It's a legal guide on land consolidation, but it's much more than a legal guide. It also provides detailed recommendation on how to implement, how we recommend to implement land consolidation projects, so that they are in line with the voluntary guidelines on tenure, so that they support the achievement of the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. And in this new guide, we have defined land consolidation as a legally regulated procedure led by a public authority and used to adjust the property structure in rural areas through a comprehensive reallocation of parcels coordinated between landowners and users in order to reduce land fragmentation, facilitate farm enlargement, or achieve other public objectives, including nature restoration and construction of large-scale infrastructure. I have the link listed below, and it's free downloadable at the FAO website. FAO has supported member countries on land consolidation since the organization was founded in 1945, and since the end of the 90s, land consolidation has come back on the political agenda in the countries in Central and Eastern Europe as a result of these farm structures that came out of the land reforms in many of the countries. So we have so far organized 20 regional workshops. We have established a technical network that we call LandNet, that is organizing these workshops with topics such as land consolidation, land banking, land market development, also state land management. And we usually organize at least one workshop per year. And LandNet is, let's say, it's open for everybody. And if any of you would be interested to participate, you will be more than welcome, and you're very much welcome to send me an email on this. And we will add you to the mailing list of LandNet. This is the status of introducing land consolidation programs in Europe and Central Asia, with the focus of Central Europe and Central and Eastern Europe. The blue countries are those that already have functioning operational land consolidation programs. The green countries are those that are in the process or have been in the process of introducing land consolidation, but we do not yet see that they have an operational program. And then there are still a few countries where little or nothing was done related to land consolidation yet. I will not go into the details with the different countries, but just show an example of what we are doing at the moment in North Macedonia, where we are implementing a project funded by the EU. This is what we call majority-based land consolidation. It means that the majority of the landowners decide about the implementation of the land consolidation plan when it's prepared. To the left was the parcel structure in the project area before the land consolidation project, and the plan that was approved by the landowners in January this year is the map to the right, indicating the new parcels, but also the rehabilitation of irrigation, the construction of new field roads and drainage channels. And we have, through this project, reduced the number of parcels with a factor 3.5 and integrated the improvement of the agricultural infrastructure in the area. So the three pillars of the FAO land consolidation program in the region is to issue technical guidelines. And here again, I would mention the new legal guide on land consolidation. We have also a number of, sit back to the 1940s and 50s, we have issued, or the organization has issued guidelines on land consolidation. So it all exists and is still available at the FAO website. We have conducted field projects in 11 program countries, and we are disseminating, sharing experiences between the countries through the annual LandNet conferences that I already mentioned. Now, what is the relationship between land consolidation and the land market? And I would show the example from a pilot project we did some years ago in Moldova. Again, we have in the map in the bottom the situation before the project to the left, and to the right the situation after the project. A local farmer had wished to acquire 30 hectares of land and establish a new orchard. This land was owned by 124 individuals before the project. The farmer had managed to buy on his own 10 hectares, the larger parcels, as you can see on the map to the left. But the remaining parcels, they comprised of, they had an average size that was 0.14 hectares, so relatively small, and some of them were much smaller. And this guy had given up completely. He could not track down these 80 or more landowners, and also transaction costs were very high compared to the value of the land. But through the land consolidation project, he acquired the land, 15 hectares in addition from 80 landowners, and we can see now that the land market can start to function. He still does not own all the land in the area where he is interested to, or was interested to, plant the orchard, but he can plant the orchard, and he can fill in then the white spots as he can reach agreement with those owners in the future. Land banking is, let's say, the second instrument in Western Europe. It's almost always combined with land consolidation. It's an instrument that is supporting implementation of land consolidation projects by increasing the land mobility in the project area. And land mobility can come, for example, from the state land, or the land that the state owns already in the project area. But it can also come from, if the state does not own such land, it can also be purchased by a land bank, a state land bank, or land fund. It has different names in different countries, with the purpose of supporting the implementation of the project. For example, if you want to take land out of production in this area, that could be for new roads, for irrigation, but it could also be for public purposes such as nature restoration, climate change adaptation, or whatever the needs might be. Then you need to have additional land so you can compensate the farmers in land and not destroy the farms that are affected. So land banking becomes an important instrument. Land banking also allows the facilitation and enlargement of the farms, because if there's no land available, then you cannot enlarge the holdings and the farms in the land consolidation projects and in general. Mediation of lease is also sometimes seen as a variation of land banking. In other countries, it's implemented as something that stands alone. It's basically connecting the owners of agricultural land that do not farm their land with local farmers. Often they do not know each other, for example, because the owners are absent from the village where they own land. They might be living in larger cities or even working abroad, and still keep the land in ownership in the remote village that they came from in Turkey or in Armenia or wherever they have such land. In Galicia in Spain, they have very good experiences with linking owners and users in a web-based mediation of lease system, and we are working with this idea in a number of countries, for example in Armenia, but also in Turkey and Azerbaijan. And again, this can also be combined with land improvement, for example, cleaning areas that were overgrown by bushes if it was abandoned for a long period, or trees, or cleaning it for big stones or small rocks, whatever might be the situation, or providing access to irrigation, for example. Then the land becomes attractive again for the market. Somebody wants to use it and it gets back into production, and in this way we are strengthening, as I mentioned in the introduction, the local food production as well. State land management and privatization is also an important instrument that is often neglected or forgotten in many countries. And many countries actually have a large reserve of state-owned agricultural land. We could call it free state land, because it's not that the state needs it for specific purposes. Of course, the state needs to have agricultural land, for example, for research purposes or whatever it could be. But many countries or many states owned a lot of agricultural land. In Lithuania, for example, 400,000 hectares of agricultural land was left in state ownership after the land reform they completed. In North Macedonia, around 40% of all arable land in the country is owned by the state. So instead of just leasing this out on auctions or privatizing it on auctions, the state land can also be used in a more targeted way, where you use the state land to improve the farm structures and to develop the land market. So use the state land for the enlargement of the holdings and farms. For example, you could use the state land as the land banking instrument to catalyze the land consolidation planning process. But you can also use state land to provide additional land to specific target groups that you want to support in the country. That could be small farms, for example, to develop small farms into commercial family farms. It could also be young farmers. There are many different options, but it's a very valuable asset that a country has free state land, and it's poorly managed in many countries. So thank you very much. I hope we will have time still for questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hartvigsen. And my first question is, do you have any question? I would like to ask other contributors to this conference, if they have any question, of course, to do that.
Yeah, I would be very interested to hear
not,
any questions and comments that you may have.
Okay. However, if I have an opportunity, I would like to deal with this presentation. I think it was quite interesting for us, and I think in your presentation, the problem of land fragmentation had a great importance, I think. However, now I would like to focus on the voluntary guideline of the concerning responsible governance of land tenure. It was adopted in 2012. And as you know, for the Hungarian legislator, the acquisition of agricultural lands by legal persons is a quite important issue. And one of the reasons of the Hungarian general restriction of the agricultural land, it is the transparency of these of the persons who own lands in Hungary. In the voluntary guideline, there were some points in which the supporters of the guidelines also emphasized the importance of the transparency of the land market. What is your experience? Is it important issues in other countries in your region, of course? That is my question.
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is, I think the guidelines are not so specific that they say whether agricultural land should be privately owned, like natural persons, or could be owned by legal persons. I think this is an issue where the governments will need to decide. But the principle of transparency in the land market is, of course, mentioned and is also very important. This also means that there should be the publication of information about land market prices and these things. Also, the regulation of the land market, I think, is a very important issue. And each country has to find a balance between, on one hand, I think if you want to develop agriculture, and this is, let's say, my aim with what we are doing and the aim of FAO, that we want to support development of agriculture. We want to focus on, let's say, on those who are not able to develop themselves. So our focus is mainly on the small farms and developing the small farms. The large cooperative enterprises, they can manage themselves. Of course, they have to follow the legislation in the specific country, but they find ways to develop. What is important is to support the small farms and to find ways to support them in the process as well. And the regulation of the land market is a balance on one hand between avoiding or trying to get speculation out of the land market as much as possible. But on the same hand, we also want to have investments in agriculture. So this is a very delicate balance where each country has to find its own way of dealing with this. Because if you say you invest in agriculture or you have investments from outside of agriculture, how would you then be sure that this is not for speculative purposes and you would sell this land again immediately when you can make a profit out of it? So that indicates that we should regulate the land market. On the other hand, we can also regulate the land market and in principle say that only farmers, natural persons, should be allowed to own agricultural land. Well, if I understand correct, the situation in Hungary, this is has more or less been the approach. But this means, of course, at least in some countries that are not as developed as Hungary, it will be very difficult to get investments into agriculture where you do not have access to EU rural development and direct support to the farmers. How will poor farmers in Bosnia or Armenia or Georgia, how will they develop when the countries cannot afford to subsidize their agricultural production? And in this sense, so this balance between the under-regulation and the over-regulation of the land market is very important and also political sensitive, of course, but difficult to find as well. But I think it should be based on some considerations of what is best for the development of agriculture and what type of agriculture do we really want to support. This is also about creating rural jobs and rural livelihoods and ensuring that also the rural population as such is benefiting from the development. There are countries in the region, for example, where you could say Ukraine could be one example where only few farmers are farming all the land in the village, but there are 1,000 owners. And they are just receiving a small rent for the land that they rent out to the large farmers. So they are completely detached from production, and all this innovation, all this development that small family farms could have created in Ukraine, just to use an example, is completely missing in this process. This backbone of family farms that is the core of the structure in many Western and Central European countries is completely missing in most of the countries that we are trying to support. And here the regulation of the land market becomes very important. Thank you.